Hey everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to this talk. My name is Siddharth. I'm a product manager with Databricks. Super excited to be speaking with you today. I've had the good pleasure of speaking with some of you at Data and AI Summit 2022, 2023. And this year, we're bringing together a lot of the things we had been working on in R&D and with our field friends. We will be talking about how can you go ahead and scale your Databricks usage from the very small to large organizations with over 500,000 users. With me, I'm excited to introduce our co-presenter, Silvio.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. Thanks for being here with us. My name is Silvio Fan. I'm a product specialist in our field engineering org, and I look after some of our enterprise platform capabilities and data warehouse offering.
Great, I'm gonna get us off with a question. By now, who has this slide memorized by heart? If you haven't seen it 25 times already, this is your last golden chance to see it. We have one more session after this. But as you know, we're excited to bring you insights into what we are thinking of in R&D. Sometimes that means we're going ahead and talking to you about things which are in preview or are still in ideation. I'll try and be as clear as I can as we go on what's available for use and on which clouds. So with that, let's jump in. I want to start by taking a step back to the origins of Databricks. Now, I wasn't here back then, but the stories that I've heard, in the initial days, it was our data engineers, data scientists who are coming together in Databricks to crunch a lot of numbers super fast and come up with a ton of insights, which means you typically needed a few dozen of them in Databricks. A few years go by, and in 2021, we announced a general availability Databricks SQL. Those of you who like watching Gartner's Magic Quadrants, we're super excited. Databricks SQL has been announced a leader in cloud DBMS systems for 3 years in a row. We're excited to see the growth. And what does that mean for identity? That then means instead of a few dozen or a few hundred data engineers, you're now bringing in thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of data analysts into Databricks. But if you've been paying attention to what has been announced over the last couple of days with Genie Spaces, data rooms, AI BI dashboards, we're now at a point where through Databricks, we can democratize access to data and AI to everyone in your organization. Which means, for those of you who are working closely with Databricks admins and IT admins, there's now a need to bring your users into Databricks so they can all benefit from these innovations you're unleashing. Now, where are these users? A lot of your data engineers and ML engineers are probably working in specialized tools such as IDEs. Business analysts like their favorite third-party BI tools. Hopefully, they'll like the new AI BI dashboards we just announced. And then you have a lot of business users across the spectrum of different tools. But if you have all of these users and you connect it all back to the single layer for data governance, that's Unity Catalog. As Matej said this morning, unified governance is key to our Databricks company strategy and for you to be able to specify access policies once and benefit from them regardless of where these users are and how they consume this information. One of the best parts about being a product manager on the team is I get to work with a lot of smart customers, many of you in the room. I wanted to share with you an email from one of our customers a few months ago. Now, we've been working with Alex and his team over the last few years as they have increased their usage of Databricks. And a couple of things I want to highlight is the things around group-based identity management and administration. Our account-level identity enhancements are all things that help them scale successfully. Between Silvio and I, we've probably worked with several hundred customers over the last few years, and we're excited to bring all that we have learned to you in terms of best practices you can deploy in your organizations. So in this session, we're going to be taking a look at scale from 3 lenses. How do you go ahead and scale your provisioning and user logins, data isolation, and finally, automation and delegation. When it comes to provisioning and user logins, let's go through a simple canonical use case we typically see. When a customer gets started, there's a business need that's been identified, and you want to go ahead and get a proof of concept going. Now, one of the first things you can do to set yourself up well to scale from the get-go is to set up single sign-on. And that is a screenshot from Okta. You may have a different identity provider. There's one thing you'll take away from this slide. Just set up SSO to be able to, for any of your users to be able to log in. Then you won't have to go back and update this configuration later, set it up for day one, move on. Second thing, Now you've gone ahead and used that use case well. You're ready to deploy it in production. At this time, you probably want to expand from a single proof of concept workspace to one for staging, one for production use. And you want to start configuring access control through a lot of the things that we have been building into the product. And then, when your one business unit is successfully using it and you're ready to scale the usage further to additional business units, that's a great time to go ahead and standardize access management with Databricks. How many folks in the room use something like a ServiceNow, perhaps, to get access to different systems? Few of you. Some of you may have different identity providers or requests for access workflows. So this is a great time to go ahead and make sure the groups that you're using with Databricks, people know how to get added to them with the existing tools which your company already uses. And so setting us up in this manner means it'll be easier for you to scale as your journey continues. So that was a high-level framing. But I want to switch gears a bit and talk about the people in your organization. So once again, you have a class of users in the top row who are going to be interacting directly with the database artifacts and getting insights. Then you have a bunch of important stakeholders, perhaps people in security, legal, your IT team, your billing or procurement department, who will all also have an interest in making sure you use Databricks well across your organization. So how does all of that start mapping back to the things we'll unpack today? Now, there is no right answer, and some companies are at varying levels of the spectrum. But as we work with customers, we find many of them, by the nature of their businesses and organizations, think perhaps large conglomerates, work in a decentralized manner, where there is a central platform team who advises on the best practices, but leaves the implementation to the individual business units. In other cases, for companies which may be mid-sized or have a very centralized organization structure within their IT and cloud infrastructure departments, the platform team is also responsible for implementing the best practices. Now, as we go through some of these guidelines in this session today, you can think about which one works well for your specific organization. Let's jump straight in now to some of the details. What are the type of things you should try and do to make sure Databricks usage scales well, and as people find more value, they're able to derive insights faster? You want to onboard all your users and groups. I'll talk about that in some depth. You want to make sure you're leveraging or auditing integrations well. Super important when you have all the access governed through a single layer in Unity Catalog. And for AWS, you want to set up SSO. And for Azure, we'll talk about an interesting new development in R&D called seamless onboarding. So problem number one, how do you go ahead and scale your logins? Now, in the old model, for those of you who have been working with Databricks a while, you used to configure single sign-on repeatedly with each workspace. We have moved to account-level identity, which means you no longer need to have this per workspace single sign-on configuration. You can instead directly go ahead and do it at the account level and have it automatically apply to all new workspaces in these accounts. You've probably been reading a lot and watching keynotes, but if you were to go to our release notes and hit refresh, I'm excited to announce we are launching unified login to general availability today. There's a rel note out. So we encourage you all to use this across your organizations. To show this in action very quickly, I'll move over and show you a quick demo. So this is for AWS, and we're imagining you have an identity provider. And if you want to use this well, especially a new feature, you probably want to think about a hardware key-based enrollment scheme. So to get us started, I'll go ahead and get us to a clean state. I'm logged in, so it'll get us to an initial state. Perfect. So I'm now logged in to the account console. I go into settings, single sign-on, and here I can type in my client secret and client identifier from my identity provider, and I can go ahead and hit save. Now, one of the problems we used to hear about from IT teams is sometimes you're not sure if the single sign-on is working well, and if you were to turn it on, it would be a problem for your users. So to fix that, over the last year, we have launched this test SSO feature. It'll go by in a flash. I click the button, it sends me back to the IDP, and after I'm successfully authenticated, it comes back and gives me a confirmation. So you can be confident before you hit SSO that it's working well. Knowing that it's tested successfully, you can now confidently go ahead and enable single sign-on. Now, this is great. Everyone else in our organization can now use single sign-on. Now, there are some times when you may have a situation where an account admin needs to get in, perhaps a sample certificate expired. I see a couple of heads nodding. Or the client secret. I actually did this test with Entra ID, and they're enforcing a 2-year lifetime for client secret for OIDCs. So in those cases, we're excited to have worked on this feature where I can go ahead and just bring in an account admin and allow them to log in with emergency access. This means at this point, Andy, who's an account admin, can go ahead and register a hardware-based security key. And if they wanted to log into Databricks without SSO or to come in and fix or troubleshoot SSO issues, they would be authorized to do so. And remember the slide where I showed you no longer have to configure single sign-on? The caption bar is hovering over it, but if you look past and squint a little, you see unified login enabled and is applying to all workspaces in the account. This means you no longer have to configure workspace level SSO ever again. So with that, let's come back to our slides and continue on. So the second problem we'll talk about is how do you go ahead and scale user provisioning. So single sign-on is working well. And now you want to start working with users. So there was a question in the audience about account level skim and onboarding those users here. So they're correct. That is the standard way to bring all of your users. Your users and groups already exist in your identity provider. Instead of syncing them into individual workspaces, just sync them over to the account level using account level skim. Then use controls within Databricks to say which users and groups are authorized to access which workspaces. And your administrators, including workspace admins, can onboard new users as they need to. Now, this is a standard scheme, works well for all IDPs in general. But the question in the room, which some of you didn't hear before the talk got started, was, can we do better? And the answer is yes. I'm excited to announce seamless onboarding in preview for Azure Databricks. So if you have Entra ID as your identity provider and you're using Azure Databricks, just like how you can go ahead and see all of your Entra ID users and groups in Azure portal, you can actually now see all of your users and groups inside the Workspace Admin console, and Workspace administrators can decide which users or groups they want to onboard to the workspace. So you don't even have to set up skim for Azure customers. We're exploring other clouds and other identity providers. If you have feedback, of course, please keep it coming. Thank you. Great. So that was a fancy cloud clapping slide, and this is a reality check slide. How many of you have been using Databricks with workspace level skim for a while? I see a few hands up, and unfortunately, a couple of head shakes. Yes, it was an older scheme. Like I said, you no longer need to do it, but we understand the realities that exist. So what do? How do you get to this ideal state? One complexity that arises is if you have groups that you configured to the workspace level, then they reside within the workspace, and they are workspace scoped groups. Now, this was challenging historically to get them moved to the account level, but another exciting thing we have done in R&D and in partnership with our field org this year is you have an ability to use UCX as a migration tool. It's a pretty cool tool, and it wraps around a neat API. So what you do is you say, for this workspace, I want to take my workspace local groups, and I want to make them account level groups. But the trickiness was all of the permissions to various kinds of things which are given to your old workspace level groups. Using UCX, you can now go ahead and migrate the groups and have all of those permissions also automatically update. So that's a great thing I recommend you go ahead and try, especially as you're getting ready to start using UC even more meaningfully across your organization. Bringing it all together, for the IAM section, there are two problems we looked at, which was setting up single sign-on and onboarding your users and groups. Remember a few minutes ago, we discussed two types of admin models. So depending on whether your organization is more in the decentralized or the centralized side, you may decide who ends up becoming Databricks admins in your accounts and workspaces. They can go ahead and do these operations at the account level to help you scale well in the future. Remember, adding a user or a group to the account level does not give them permissions to any workspaces automatically. That is a decision the workspace admins can still take on their own. This slide summarizes the operations you can do on each side, the account level and the workspace level. With that, I'm excited to invite Silvio to talk to us about data isolation.
Thank you very much, Sid. Okay, so Sid talked a lot about how we scale provisioning and user logins. In this section, we'll talk about how you scale access to data while also being mindful of data isolation strategies, as well as how the users access data, which is sometimes from Databricks, sometimes from third-party tools. So how do we actually go and scale that to 500,000 users or more? Across the section, we're going to talk about how important it is to plan your data isolation model, how you can assign UC securables across specific workspaces, and how you can make sure you implement fine-grained access controls. We'll also briefly cover how you can, how we recommend you leverage serverless networking configs and Lakehouse Federation to scale more than just your data lake to other third-party database systems. And we also highly recommend you configure access through OAuth in the new centralized ways we're offering you at the account and workspace level, and with the native integrations for Power BI tooling. I also get to talk about Seamless and actually show you Seamless, so quite excited about that. Okay, first, so how do we scale user access to more data? Firstly, as you are thinking about Unity Catalog, I'm assuming most people are on their journey at some point in their journey to implementing Unity Catalog. Make sure you think about your isolation strategy, how you separate your different testing and production environments, how you assign the different securables within UC to your different workspaces, and how you implement access controls. So how do you actually think about mapping workspaces to catalogs to make sure that your production catalogs are only accessed from production workspaces, while your staging and dev can actually intermingle from time to time depending on how your organization functions. It's not just a problem of the assets themselves, it's a problem of people. How do you think about the different administrators that actually work with Unity Catalog? How do you make sure that those people are trained and actually know what it takes to actually be a catalog owner, and make sure that they can handle the different administration tasks that they have to do within their own catalogs. And we'll talk about a customer example in a second as well. You can also enforce hard boundaries with storage isolation, so mapping default locations at the catalog level for new assets that are being created there. And finally, we also recommend you set up access controls and you delegate some of that to your new Metastore admin so that you can actually scale the business and not depend on one single person usually in the organization who gives access to data. We also have recently announced the ability to share metadata for discoverability. We've had customer concerns around, okay, but if I do share something across the org, people can see everything that's in there. Well, now you can make metadata discoverable specifically. You can grant browse broadly across the different assets, across the different catalogs in UC. So it gives users the ability to see data and then follow internal processes to be able to learn more. And a lot of this data is not just within Unity Catalog, not at the start, not just in your data lake. A lot of customers want to do more and access data which is sitting in third-party databases. And it's usually for three main reasons. One, if you do want to get access to data, but you don't have the resources to do ETL on it, then bring it in your data lake. Second, if you do want to do that ETL, but you want a simple way to do data migrations. Or third, you just want to do ad hoc distributed analysis. You can use Lakehouse Federation to do all of these, and you can very easily connect to third-party data sources. It's as simple as creating those connections within Databricks, setting those up. We're also implementing OAuth into some of these. I believe Snowflake is already up and running, and we're working very closely to implement more with more database providers. Once you create these connections, you can very simply create the new external catalog and then leverage UC permissions across the board, across all of your users to grant permissions to these third-party databases. Okay, so I'll talk very briefly about a customer example. This was from a large pharma customer who's been using Databricks for several years. They have a central platform team that's been trying to increase efficiency in their cloud blueprint, and they've been working on rolling out UC. Michael's also in the room, who's been helping them with this, so he would know quite a bit about their particular journey here. In short, the customer has looked at UC. They've thought about their isolation strategy. They ended up with a single Metastore per region to make sure that they're isolating within their cloud tenant, but also they wanted to make sure that they have separate catalogs for their central team as well as for their regional BUs. The biggest challenge for this particular customers was like, how do you actually define their owner groups? How do you actually make sure those are reflected in Entra? How do you make sure that they've identified the people in the business who will do this and how they've trained them up to be able to do this at scale across all of the different pharma businesses and regions that they're operating in. And they're using a lot of the other UC features, but for them, it was mostly a matter of process and figuring out who in the business should do some of these operations. Now, we've talked a bit about scaling access to data. How about scaling access for these users to be able to use Databricks from their favorite tools and leverage the power of Databricks compute? Well, we've introduced the ability for native integrations across many, many BI tools. What you see here is that we offer automated connections for OAuth for some of our most popular tools, from Tableau to Power BI to some of the Databricks SQL connectivity. All of these are auto-created connections for your favorite BI tools so that users can be productive from the get-go, straight in the platform with OAuth. If you have any additional data sources, you can add connections to those as well. And from a user's perspective, users really just log in. They can query the freshest data using Databricks SQL. They can build native apps and dashboards through pretty much any BI tool. If we have a quick example on our Tableau connector, you can set up OAuth as an authentication mechanism. Simply points the user to their Databricks login. They log in, MFA supported, user is in. A very, very straightforward experience for them. Now, let's talk a bit about Seamless and what Seamless is and how that looks like from an end user perspective, as well as from the administration side. So we're going to go through a flow where an administrator updates Entra ID with group memberships being changed for a user. That also updates UC grants, so what that user can see and how that's reflected in the BI layer. So we start off with 3 different groups: the data stewards, a finance and an engineering group. We have a data publisher who's part of our data stewards group, and we have a Power BI analyst who's working for our engineering function. All of these 3 different groups are granted access to a table in Unity Catalog with some sales data, but only 2 of these groups are given access to the actual sales price. If you're not in the data stewards group or the finance group, you will not be able to see the sales price. So initially, the Power BI analyst can't see the sales price from our sales data. What we'll show is as soon as we update the group membership in Entra ID, as when the user does a login operation, that they will get access to that particular sales price data and the column level policy that is applied to it in UC. And they don't really have to do anything from the user side nor from the admin side. Okay, so let's have a look how this works. And if I can. Okay, cool. So I managed to test this over the past couple of weeks. We're using several UC features here as well. We are using primary keys and foreign keys just so that users understand a bit more about the relationship between the tables themselves. We're also creating a masking function within Unity Catalog to be able to hide the sales price for anybody who is not in the finance or data stewards group. As we move to the UC interface within Databricks, we can see all the different primary keys and foreign keys. We can also view the relationship diagram. It's pretty easy to kind of explore the data model straight from within Unity Catalog. Now, another really cool thing that we've launched recently is the ability to publish these data models straight into Power BI. So the user who has access to the catalog and to a Power BI workspace, they can natively within the interface select their Power BI workspace, select the dataset mode, and publish all of these different models together with their semantic relationships as well as their description, straight to Power BI and reflect that for users into Power BI. Now we're here as the data steward, the data publisher. We published this model into our revenue operations Power BI workspace. And as we go into the semantic model and have a quick look at it, we can see what we saw in Unity Catalog. We can see the same model with the same relationships, and we can also see the descriptions that we've attached to some of the columns and any other metadata that we've kind of attached within Unity Catalog. Now we've switched over to our Power BI analyst. We built a report on top of that semantic model as the data publisher. We've shared it with our Power BI analyst, and they refresh the report and they don't really see sales price. They see some of the information in the table, what they were granted at the start. So things like sales ID and sales categories, etc. but all of the information around the price sold itself is hidden from the user. And that's because of our masking function that we've applied within Unity Catalog. We refresh the page a couple times just to make sure that there's nothing going wrong here. It's all intended. So the engineering group doesn't actually see this. So if we switch over to Enter ID, we can see our 3 groups, our data stewards, our engineering, our finance group. We switch over to our engineering group, we can see the Power BI analyst is in there. If we switch over to our finance group, we can quickly see that our Power BI analyst is not in here. Now, because they're doing some work for our finance department, we want to make sure that we add them to the Entra group. Usually what we see in a lot of our customers, whenever a Power BI user wants to be part of a group, they message somewhere in their IT team. Their IT team is very familiar with Entra, so they just add them to Entra and expect things to work. IT team sees that our Power BI analyst is now part of the finance group, and they tell them, look, this should work now. Previously, you had to either wait for a skim refresh or to do a skim push operation and kind of set that up within Databricks. Well, you don't really need to do that anymore. If we jump over back to Databricks and we have a look at the new groups without setting up any operation within Databricks on the administration side, we can have a look at the finance group, and we can see that the new user is now reflected straight into Databricks in the new finance group. And what that means is that UC permissions are now applied to them. So as they start refreshing the BI dashboard, they can slowly see some of the price sold information straight into Power BI. No operation was needed on the Databricks side. It was just the user accessing all of this data all at once. So yeah, pretty neat. Awesome. So there's a lot of different things to kind of consider that we hear from customers as we talk about data isolation or setting up external tools. Anything from how cumbersome it is to plan for data isolation models, to some teams saying they want more control in their central team, to some teams saying they want less control for their central team and they want more control on the BU side of things, or how a lot of data is just sitting outside my data lake or outside a Unity catalog. We're introducing more and more ways to be able to give you centralized governance at the account level, but also ways to be able to handle some of these aspects within the workspace. So if you think about a customer that doesn't really know what users need access to what data, well, we make it really easy to make sure that you can onboard as many users as possible in a seamless way without much administration overhead. And then making sure that you can facilitate governance easy for new users that do need access to data as you figure out those processes. And you have the ability to delegate ownership of data assets from the workspace itself, or you can think about how you expand that data usage from just beyond the data lake to these users as they keep asking for data using third-party data sources through Lakehouse Federation. So all in all, we're trying to simplify account management, we're trying to simplify workspace management, we're trying to limit the number of operations that you do need to do within Databricks if you're already doing them in other places like Entra ID, to be able to give you simpler ways to reach a high number of users within the platform. Now I'll hand over to Sid to talk a bit about automation and delegation.
Thank you, Silvio. So you've seen how we can go ahead and scale both your data usage, including from other external sources, to also being able to scale usage to a different wide set of tools that your users may be using. And another dimension of scale is, great, things are working well, users are onboarded, data is segregated, they're getting to it from all of their preferred tools, but how do you go ahead and make this self-sustaining? And to do that, in this segment, we will talk about scaling ongoing Databricks usage. Best practices, 5 thoughts I'll leave you with. First, you want to think about designing workspaces as collaboration boundaries. I'll unpack that in a minute. Very important, security is top of mind, if I may say so, especially this week, this year, for all of you. And so really you want to think about workspace administrators and making sure you're making the right folks workspace admins and leveraging other permission sets and controls you have been building into the product. I'll unpack one in another minute. You want to think about using service principles as you look at building critical data pipelines. A lot of you use Databricks for ETL and other important ongoing administration via workflows. You want to leverage the account console. So I won't have another slide on this, but happy to take questions on the 4th one. But the idea is, if you have a lot of workspaces and you want the same settings to apply to all of them, we have built both tooling as well as UX to help make that easily possible for you. And you want to think about Terraform. I'll explain that in a minute too. So let's jump in. From the IAM R&D team, we have been having a lot of enhancements and improvements on the service principal usage and permissions. Let's go use case by use case. How many folks in the room use Databricks workflows or jobs? I see almost 3/4 of the room going up. Great, this reflects what I see in product data when we try and understand usage. Now my question, how many of you have those jobs or workflows running as users? Some people are being honest, some are looking to their left and right. No, the reality is, and a lot of this is because in the early days, Databricks didn't have the right controls built in or it wasn't easy to use them. Now you have Databricks workflows, and as a security best practice, we recommend you run them as service principals. Now the best part, if all you want to do is create a job and have it run as an SP, it's super easy. You can create the job as an SP itself, great, or you can create the job as a user through the UI if that's easier for you, but then designate it to run as a service principal. Now the question becomes, well, who is allowed to use a service principal? Because what if you have a very highly privileged service principal which is authorized to access some important data? To do that, we have invested in two simple permission sets, SP user and SP manager. SP user, you can assign that, we recommend as a best practice to a group, and people in this group are allowed to use this SP for their jobs. SP manager is allowed to do more sensitive operations, including giving other people permissions to use the service principal. Simple, clean model. Second thing we have done since the last Data and AI Summit to now is we have launched Databricks-built OAuth tokens on all 3 clouds. It's generally available and being used. The way it works is if you look at the screenshot on the top right, you can go ahead and ask Databricks to generate a OAuth client secret for you, and then using the standard OAuth client credentials flow, you can play that secret to get yourself a token. You can do that directly. It's integrated with other tools which you may be using for automation. The third thing to keep in mind is in some cases, especially for Azure customers, I hear that I already have Azure service principals and I'd love to use them. Here's the way that I recommend to think about it. If you have automation that is only hitting Databricks endpoints, and you're running in a decentralized structure, you have a lot of business units trying to scale these to hundreds of thousands of users and lots of jobs. In those cases, we have launched this year Databricks-only service principals on Azure. So you can just get tokens like the one you see on the screen and hit any and all Databricks endpoints. On the other hand, if you are building more complex pipelines, things that hit ADF, then Databricks, perhaps other Azure or external services, and you want to use Azure service principals, great, you can do that too. To do that, you can go in and add service principal from the UI, and in the seamless onboarding preview, which you just saw, we're also looking to add service principal support, overcoming one of the shortcomings of the Microsoft Entra ID Skim Sync connector and Skim as a protocol, if I may say so, where it doesn't allow you to sync in service principals. So picking the right type of SP based on our use case is important, and once you do that, it's a security best practice. We've made it easy and convenient on all 3 clouds. Second thing, a lot of you, perhaps your DevOps teams, a lot of other folks, for various reasons, really like using CI/CD. It's a great best practice. Terraform is super popular. There are 30 million plus installations of the Databricks Terraform modules. It's generally available, very widely used. We encourage you to use it. There is a Terraform registry module. I was checking out the blog again this morning, and I was excited to see there are 30 plus reusable examples. So go check it out, figure out if that's something which you want to use in your organizations. That'll really help you get up and going and scale administration easily. Third thing, interesting topic. We could literally spend 90 minutes on this. Don't worry, we just have a few to go, so I'll hit it very quickly. What about workspaces? So on one end of the spectrum, you want to have a dev, test, and prod workspace and encourage collaboration. So the fewer workspaces you have, the easier it is for people to just work with each other. But if you have multiple business units, probably makes sense for you to think about more workspaces. General thought I'll leave you with this is this. On scaling side, Databricks is able to support hundreds of thousands of users, hundreds of thousands of groups, hundreds of workspaces. What is it that makes sense for you, given your deployment, your organization preferences? We're happy to work with you on it. We're ready to support. Try and balance out having as few as you reasonably can, but still having the ones you need for isolation. Happy to unpack that more after the session. Now I'm about to go into the third and the final demo of the talk. And as much as I loved Silviu's cool, here's how I'm going to publish and make Power BI work, honestly, this is my favorite demo of the talk. So let me go ahead and set it up. You're going to take a look at a data publisher who's going to publish a dashboard. It is going to use Seamless. It is going to use AI BI dashboards that you've been hearing a lot about. And I won't spill out the rest, but walk you through it step by step. So let's jump in. OK, so I'm starting us off in the revenue operations workspace, and I'm logged in as the data publisher. Now, as I do this, I can look at the same sales data that Silviu was showing us from Power BI, but I can take a look at it from here. I hit share, and I start searching for this group. Do you see the suffix in Microsoft Entra ID? Guess what? That means these groups have not been onboarded to Databricks yet. So I give Sales Americas USA Washington group can view permissions on this dashboard. Notice the dashboard sharing setting says only people with access can view. So I copy this dashboard link, right? And if I'm the publisher, I now go ahead and send an email or a Slack over to my associates. To show you what that group looks like, I'm going to switch over to Entra ID. You can see there is Kirkland, Redmond, and Seattle sales associates in the Sales Americas USA Washington group. Now remember, the Seattle sales associate never logged into Databricks, never hit the Databricks URL so far. They get a link to the dashboard, and they go ahead and stick it into the browser. To show that, I've switched over to a separate browser window, and we're going to go through that user's experience. As you would expect, they're basically getting hit with their Entra ID credentials. They go ahead and log in, hit sign in, and now at this point, they're able to look at that dashboard, which was shared with them. What's happened behind the scenes? They've been added to the Databricks account, but they have not been added to the workspace as a user. Now, if the workspace admin wants to, they can still onboard them, but this really opens up access to AI, BI dashboards and insights across your organization. It pulls together seamless onboarding, as well as the new dashboards experience you've been hearing about the last couple of days. Thank you. So to bring it all together, how can you go ahead and scale to 500,000 users and beyond? You want to think about, if you're on AWS, you want to configure single sign-on with Entra ID, Okta, or IDP of your choice. On Azure and on Google Cloud, we natively integrate with the cloud identity providers, so you can set up sign-on there if you'd like. Azure, you can start doing seamless onboarding. It's in preview right now. The single sign-on stuff for AWS is generally available. As I mentioned, we announced general availability of unified login at this conference. For data isolation and external tools to scale usage, you want to plan through your isolation model upfront. Think about features like workspace catalog bindings and other things Silviu spoke about. And to allow usage to scale with users' preferred BI tools, use the OAuth-based investments and the new single sign-on improvements we've been building out over the last year. When it comes to automation and delegation, use service principles well. There's a lot that we have added to that user journey over the last year. And encourage sharing artifacts in your organization so you can derive more value and innovation from what different people in the company are doing. Thank you so much for joining our session.